Thank you, Katharina. I'm not sure if the reference was to the grey look or to the hairline that is going there, but yes, I've been around for some time. So thank you, Scott, for hosting this event. Thank you, Paul, for bringing this all together with Katharina. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the early stage of a Saturday morning. And in the meantime, I'll pull out the presentation that I'm due to give to you. I've been asked to just set the scene, and that's good enough for me. Wondering this weekend, I'm just wondering, what am I setting the scene for? Is it about the health of the Paralympic athlete, or is it to try to keep some of my colleagues separated in what's supposed to be a rugby weekend? So we'll find out, but we will close in time. Most of you might be familiar with who we are, but I've been asked to frame a little bit the agenda of medical care in the Paralympic movement. So we are the IPC, and if you see that we are founded in 1989, we are a relatively young organization. We are a young organization, and I think we should keep that in mind throughout this talk, and it also explains where we are at this point in time when we talk about athlete medical care and health for Paralympic athletes. It was only until 1999 that we set up a professional management team, and we have an office in Bonn, in Germany, the former capital of Western Germany. And when I joined in 2006, my immatriculation number in the office says 22. So I was the 22nd staff member on the payroll. We were 15 at that time in the office. Today we are 75. And I think that also says something about the growth of the movement, the growth of the organization. We have a membership structure. That means we have a General Assembly, which is our decision-making body. They meet every 2 years, and the members are the nations. For the moment, we are around 180, Amaranta, something like that. Yeah. We have 4 regional organizations. We have the Asian Committee, we have the Oceania Committee, the African Committee, European Committee, and then we have an Americas region who is not yet independent because they're in development. Historically, and I'll briefly touch on that one, we have a structure of impairment related international federations that are the founding members. They are referenced as the IOSDs, so they have a voting right. And then the sports in the movement are members. So UCI, representing paracycling, is a member of the IPC. And that's how we are slightly different if you compare us in the structure of the IOC, where there is a partnership that is games related. Here we have a membership structure with all of these sports and all of these nations having a say in how, in the further direction of this organization. We have 30 sports, 24, I need to always look at it, 24 summer sports. We have 22 sports in Rio. We add paracanoe and paratriathlon for the first time in Rio. And then in Tokyo, we will have badminton and parataekwondo. Unfortunately, we will lose at that time football 7 and sailing. But that's also a little bit how the drive is within the movement. There are some developments that are sport specific, and then in winter sports we are growing. We have 6 sports for the moment, but we have an opportunity for growth there. Where did it all start? 1948, London is hosting the Olympic Games, and Sir Ludwig Goodman, who's a German surgeon who left Germany during World War II because he had Jewish roots, he was in charge of the rehabilitation center of Stoke Mandeville in England with war veterans. And on the day of the opening ceremony of the London Olympic Games, he decided to host a sport event in the garden of the rehab center. He was very firm into adding sports as integral part of the rehabilitation. And that day is considered a little bit the birthday of the Paralympic movement. So he's our godfather, and July, I think 29th of July, 1948 is our birthday. Again, a very young organization. So Goodman then continued to host this sporting event on an annual basis, and at a certain moment in time he extended an invitation abroad and the event became international. Archery was the first sport, 16 athletes, 2 nations, UK and the Netherlands, and from there it grew into ultimately 1960 when we hosted the first international event. This was in Rome, and now we had the first what we call Paralympic Games. 1976, we expanded into the winter events. We had our first winter Paralympic Games in Sweden, and the Swedish colleagues will be able to tell you what the name of the city. I'll refrain from that one. Make a little jump here, 1989. Historically, we had an international sport organization for the blind, which was IPSA. We had an international organization for CP athletes, which was called CP ISRA. We had the International Stoke Mandeville Wheelchair Sport Federation, Stoke Mandeville, there the name comes again. So, and we had IZOT, International Sport Organization for the Disabled, which was amputee and the Les Autres category, and I'm promise not to expand on classification, Katarina. And then we had at that moment INAS, MF, which was athletes with intellectual impairment. And the IOC, they were all seeking to get kind of an affiliation with the Olympic Games and asking for Paralympic Games to be done in conjunction with the Olympic Games. And the IOC said, that's fine, but we want one body to talk to. We want you to get together so that we have one partner that we can have this dialogue with. So they sat together, got all around the table, and they signed up for what then became the IPC 1989. That's where we historically come from. I jump a little bit to 2000. 2000 is when we first signed a very official agreement with our colleagues in the IOC, with the Olympic Committee. That was that from now on, it is an obligation. If a city bids for the Olympic Games, they are obliged to also take on board the Paralympic Games. And it's not an obligation at this very moment, it's really a partnership. And we had a few iterations of that agreement, so now we have a long-lasting partnership that even extends way beyond on just having 2 events at the same time. So. It, however, defines a little bit also the framework on the Paralympic Games. So we have an agreement on the number of sports, the number of athletes, the number of medals, and that's the boundaries in which we can then develop the sport. And as team physicians, you all know that if an event is not on the Paralympic Games program, it's obviously very difficult to develop it in full extent. And then we get to London and Sochi, and quite exciting, and they set the scene for where we are today. And just briefly recapping this in numbers, Rome 1960, 400 athletes, 23 countries. London 4,237 athletes and 164 nations. The target for Rio is 4,300 athletes. Obviously we want more nations, but that's your job. Winter sports, we went from 53 athletes to 540 athletes, and we went from 60 countries to 45. And there is some numbers in what it means in number of sports, but also in worldwide reach, where we got and at this moment in time. This is our core values. This is our athlete population. Our athlete population is quite unique, and as Katarina alluded to, I've been an humble servant for them since quite some time, and I still enjoy it. And I do it because we have that unique athlete population. Courage, determination, inspiration, and equality. This is an athlete group that overcame adversity in life, that put a new target in life, are determined to achieve that target, but by doing so inspire other athletes, youngsters, and by extension a society, and they do that on the basis of seeking a drive for inclusion. And these values are the drivers of our daily activities, of your work as team physicians, and of the work from all the partners that we are working with. This came together recently in our strategic plan, and I just highlight it because it sets the scenes to introduce some of the medical aspects here. These values are the core of our strategic plan, and in order to obtain those values, we have what we call drivers. We need to build organizational capacity. You are the organizational capacity. You are the human resources that we try to upskill, brief you, and get you up to date with knowledge exchange, and we take a lot of knowledge out of you. So we seek for that partnership that feeds into the work we do, for instance, with our medical committee. We seek for funding. Without money, I can't go to the shop and buy my ingredients and do some of the shopping. So that's what we are trying to reach out and get our funding more secured. People ask always, where is our funding coming from? At this very moment, it is marketing and broadcasting rights from the games. But we want to expand that one, and IPC Athletics is a good example on how we can reach out to different partners. And our third driver is partnerships. I referenced already the IOC. IOC is our main partner. Together with them is the UN, because we drive an agenda of inclusion. But then in my area, medical and scientific, my partners are organizations like Aspetar, are organizations like ACSM, American College of Sport Medicine, FIMS, who joins us in the organization of this event. These are the partners where we have, on a technical subject of medical and sports science, exchange of ideas, views, and knowledge to be brought and knowledge to be transferred. And we have created some unique platforms. This one of them, and it hopefully sets the pace for some further work. These drivers are in support of our goals. Our goals, the main objectives of the movement, is first of all the Paralympic Games. It's the premier event, and we want this to be the showcase event and make sure that this is where the athletes can excel in performance and can showcase their performances. Our second goal is being athlete-centered. We cannot have the games if we don't recruit new athletes and we don't invest in athlete development. So that's why that is a strategic goal. And the third one is to just ensure that our brand get recognized. Our Agitos, which is the symbol from the Paralympic movement, in the end of the day, we want this to be equally known as the Olympic rings. So some time to go on that one. However, these drivers and objectives, they serve a broader goal. Our vision is to enable Paralympic athletes to exceed in excellence and to inspire and excite the world. That's our vision and the driver of our daily work. Ultimately, with the aspiration to make for a more inclusive society for people with impairment through sport. This is the agenda we are driving with our partners on the United Nations. This is how we think sport can be a vehicle for change in society. And we're not only talking here about the physical barriers and making sure that the host city of the Games is accessible, that we have some accessibility advice here to be given to the city of Doha, but mainly also to make the change in the heads and make sure that there is a social legacy and a social attitude change towards individuals with an impairment. And those of you who were in Beijing, when I got first to Beijing in the lead up to the Games in 2008, we never saw an impaired individual in the streets. When you go back to Beijing now, they are there. And that is a little bit where we want to be a vehicle for change. So turning into our medical agenda, one of our strategic goals is para-athletes and athlete-centeredness, to empower our para-athletes, and this is where our development pathway comes in. And when we talk about classification, sports science, education, anti-doping, medical services, this is athlete-centeredness. This is where we contribute to an athlete development pathway. And one of our strategic objectives under this goal, is to ensure that sports are practiced in a manner that protects health, addresses needs, and respects fair play and ethics. It's a very clear strategic objective for the next term, and obviously we hope it goes beyond that one. That means all the activities I do with the department and supported by our committees needs to be aligned with this strategic objective. Otherwise, don't get the funding, I don't get the money, and my performance review doesn't look good. This all is supported by the IPC medical code. The IPC handbook is a set of rules and regulations, bylaws and constitutions that set the work we are doing, the IPC medical code being one of them. And it's important to notice that this is a mandatory document for all the nations and all the members to sign up to, all the federations to sign up to, and it's of equal importance as our IPC ethics code, the anti-doping code, and the classification code. It's to encourage all the stakeholders to take measures to protect the health of the athlete and respect fair play and ethics. And also making sure that this is not exclusive on the physical component, it's also about the psychological component of wellness, and ensuring as well that there is a very good professional relationship between athletes and the caretakers, the support team around the athlete. So turning into some of the practicalities, and again, I'm just making some introductions here. Through this morning, there's a few of the colleagues here that will talk about injury and illness. In order to know how we can best serve the athletes, we need to have a baseline. We need to have an inventory on what these athletes' injuries and illnesses are likely to be. And both Nick and Wayne will expand on this subject, but we started to do a survey to just capture this information. Not only to have these data at hand, but our medical committee engages very actively to ensure that that knowledge is transferred back to the sport in preventive measures. Preventive measures by means of changing rules, by means of doing educational efforts with athletes, or by making proposals for equipment change. One of the most obvious one was when we were in Salt Lake City in 2002, by doing a systematic survey, we recognized there was a number of acute trauma in the lower limbs. And that was by means of the confrontational nature of the sport. Matching these injuries with the footage of the event and going what happened on the field of play revealed that the leg was not properly protected or might not have been properly protected through the course of the game. So recommendations were made to have front casters on the sledges for these athletes, and as a result, we did not have any acute trauma in the lower limbs at that point, from that point onwards. That's where injury and illness surveys kick in. We need to be sensitive that the functional impact of even what we consider a minor injury or illness in a Paralympic athlete may have considerably greater impact on our athletes. When we look at our wheelchair races, wheelchair propulsion, they work out their incredible performance, but the day they retire, they continue to be wheelchair bound. And we need to be sensitive to that mode of propulsion will be their mode of propulsion for the rest of their life. And that's where we need to capture good data and a good reference material and how we can serve them. A very specific topic that Nick will expand upon is boosting, or the autonomic dysfunction that we are challenged with in certain athlete populations with spinal cord injury above T6 level. We are aware of the risks associated with it. We have initiated testing, and I'm not cutting the grass here for Nick's presentation, but we need to be aware that this is a health hazard, and we need to protect athletes on that one. In an attitude and knowledge study that we conducted in Beijing, we found out that 50% of our respondents to that study were not aware of the health risks that are associated with autonomic dysfunction, let alone that they were going to intentionally induce that component. And I'll leave it to Nick to speak to that subject in much more detail. We want to prevent. That means we enter into a dialogue preparations with organizing committees in a journey ahead of time. We did so with Doha. We worked together with Katarina, with Dr. Aston Guy, who leads on the medical services, to ensure that there is a proper level of care in place. And often we can do that on the back of what the IOC Medical Commission is developing for the Olympic Games, but then still we are responsible to ensure that there is that Paralympic specific knowledge that get into. And this is just an example when we do alpine skiing, which is our #1 risk sport in the winter sports, that we, in the test events, so the year before the games, when we do test events and we run the physical readiness of the event organizers, we go there and we do a clinic on extrication on how to deal with athletes who are in sit skis, because ski patrols are not necessarily fully aware and fully familiar with all these procedures. So our medical committee reaches out to these organizers, go with them on a journey in the organization ahead of time. And we do that by also writing up policies and procedures. We have a technical manual for our Paralympic Games on medical services that integrates what need to be put in place mandatory. And then on our journey, we regularly meet with them and make sure that these provisions are in place. We have a similar document that guides sport-specific events. So over the last 2 years, we worked very hard to have our medical care manual for IPC athletics. We have a tailored one for IPC alpine skiing. We have one for IPC swimming, and that then addresses the needs and demands. And again, the data we have from injury and illness studies feed into the development of those policies and procedures. And Nick and Wayne will speak in much more detail what that means. This is just one example. We're in Doha. I like it very much. It feels like at home. It's 35 degrees. It's 60% humidity. I will never get used to it. That's me. You have been training and working with your athletes. We, from our end, have been looking at what are the reference material in terms of when is the heat and humidity becoming uncomfortable, and what is the advice to be given when you should stop competing and not competing. We did our homework in this regard, and we found reference material from the International Athletics Federation. We found reference material from ACSM, the American College of Sport Medicine, and we said with that reference material we can give some guidance, and we say 30.1, the wet bulb globe index, which is combining temperature and humidity. When we go over that one, then we need to intervene. We need to keep an eye on what are we going to do in terms of scheduling events, in terms of postponing events, in terms of changing some of the provisions for our athletes. This is just randomly daily monitoring over the past days, and you see particularly in the morning we hit the fence a few times. We were above that one, and this thermometer you can see here on the bottom right side is out on the training track next to call room 1, so you can see these reference material. So we have developed a policy with the Chief Medical Officer from the organization, with our medical delegate, with the technical delegate of the sport, and we review all the measures that we had put in place in terms of shelters, ice, water, competition changes, seated throwing, 6 throws in a row rather than 3, having 2 throw sets up next to each other. We played around with the schedule, so we ran these exercises throughout the days, particularly in the morning session, also in the evening session. And interestingly, it's an observation, we had a little bit athlete discomfort, heat comfort in the afternoon sessions, and it's likely due because you all pay a lot of attention of hydration in the morning, but please continue these efforts through the day. It's not because the sun is gone that the temperature went down. Yeah? It only makes a difference on my tent. One of the interesting subjects that we were sensitive to, but we never had good data about, is about harassment on athletes. And the IOC effectively last week convened a consensus meeting on sexual harassment and abuse of athletes. Our chairperson of the IPC Medical Committee, Dr. Sherry Blewett, is a former athlete in the sport of athletics. She's part of that consensus meeting. And new data were presented there. They're unpublished for the moment, but they reveal that our athlete population, the disabled athlete, the athlete with an impairment, seems to be much more vulnerable to abuse, both physical and psychological, than other athlete groups. We had some anecdotal evidence. We got into the news after London with a delegation where there was coach abuse towards players. So we knew we had some anecdotal information on that one. This is a study which is under review. The latest I got is that it is accepted for publication, so it will surface over the next time. That effectively gives us some data in support. This is now very prominent on the agenda of the medical committee, and we signed up with Safe Sport International, which is a policy-making organization, to develop strategies first and primarily to prevent these kind of scenarios to happen, but secondly, to ensure that there is a pathway for an athlete who wants to speak out and seek for support through his international federation or through the IPC. On a final note, we also have a contribution on anti-doping, not only because we have that responsibility towards the World Anti-Doping Agency to also contribute to education, but primarily also because we think that there is some work that can be done with Paralympic athletes. Nikki will speak as a member of our anti-doping committee. She will speak on that subject in more detail later this morning. I just want to show you 2 quotes from result management. These are quotes from athletes that were captured when an athlete was sitting in a hearing because he got challenged with an anti-doping rule violation. The chef de mission and team physician stated in the lead up to the Winter Paralympic Games, the MPC organized a meeting with its delegation of athletes for the Games. At this meeting, anti-doping matters were discussed, and each athlete had to complete a form on which they declared what type of medication they were currently taking. If the athlete needed to take anything listed on the prohibited list, they were advised to contact the team physician. The team physician, physically present in the hearing, acknowledged that no follow-up had been initiated upon receipt of the athlete forms. In the end of the day, we all know that anti-doping comes down to a strict liability by the athlete. But obviously, there is some concern when this pops up in result management and when we have a team physician sitting there saying, I did not review the list of medication that the athlete brought forward. A second quote, and I'm not pointing at any of you here, don't take it personal. When informed by the chairperson of a hearing panel that the use of probenecid is prohibited at all times, the athlete stated that he acted under consultation by his physician and trusted his judgment. The athlete confirmed that his doctor, a family physician, was well aware of the status of an athlete as elite Paralympic athletes for many years. Quite often, when we have hearings and we have investigations going on with Paralympic athletes, we get surprised that there is only a limited number of athletes that seem to have access to sport physicians, to sport medicine practitioners, and to individuals that are very well skilled and trained and also see the full spectrum of these athletes to be seen as athletes and not as patients that on occasion do some sport and recreational. Many athletes only have access to family practitioners. There's some work to be done here. WADA is very well aware of that one. We are very well aware of that one. And Nikki will speak on that subject, on what is some of the Paralympic specific issues that you should consider when you do anti-doping education and awareness with our athletes. Our committee is very well aware that there's good information, but that information is no value when it doesn't reach you. And our committee, our medical committee, is doing a lot of efforts in making sure that the findings reach the literature, that we contribute to the body of scientific knowledge available in the medical area through scientific publications, but also because not everybody has access to these scientific reports, and because they are also written in a certain way, and often you're reduced in the number of pages or the message you can transfer. We also contribute, or have been asked to contribute, to book chapters. And book chapters reach a different audience. And this is an invitation for you to consider some of these more recent publications. We had a contribution in the IOC handbook on sport medicine on the female athlete. We had a contribution by the IPC on the IOC Manual of Emergency Sports Medicine, the FIMS Team Physician Manual, and the last publication is a publication which is forthcoming. This is from the IOC series Handbook of Sport Medicine and Science, where they asked the IPC Sports Science Committee to lead on a volume that is exclusively addressing the Paralympic athlete. We had a first edition in 2011. This is second edition, or a different edition where we focus a little bit more on training and coaching on the Paralympic athlete. And our medical committee has contributed with a chapter on healthcare for the Paralympic athlete. So stay tuned. This is going to be released on the 1st of June 2016. And IPC has engaged that every member organization will get one copy. So sign up with your MPC, with your sport, to make sure you get that one copy. And if not, you just order more. Having initiatives like this one is obviously of great interest. Team physicians sign up in a Paralympic organization primarily, luckily, fortunately, on a voluntary basis. And I would like to thank all of you for that commitment and that engagement. So when we don't have too many opportunities to meet all of you or to bring all of you together and exchange some of our knowledge and state-of-the-art findings and enter into the dialogue. Obviously, Wayne and Nick and myself, we are around, and you can reach us at any given moment in time. But bringing you together in a forum like this one is something that we consider of great value. We started doing that at the Winter Paralympic Games in Vancouver. We repeated that at Sochi, and we engaged that the presentations that were handed out there, that were spoken to, which were tailored on winter sports at that moment in time, they are available from the IPC website. So if you go on the IPC website and you go to the medical page, what we do, and then /medical, or on the main page, you go all the way to the bottom, and there's a tag medical. You go on that one. You can access all these presentations. These are reference material for you, and we continue to expand on that one as we have initiatives taking place. This one is another one that contributes to that series. Once again, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for joining. Thanks, Aspetar, for bringing this together, creating the opportunity. Thanks, FIMS, for the partnership so that we can do this as a way of activating our partnership we have with FIMS. And thank you for joining us. It has been a pleasure to set the scene, and I'll leave it to my colleagues to now get into the detail on that one. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day and the competition.